And also, the longer that one particular virus stays in one person, the higher the chance of mutation. So you take South Africa, it has both a highly unvaccinated population, but also a very high proportion of individuals with HIV disease. So immunocompromised plus lots of virus around could lead to more mutations, leading to the point, which is that to really stop all of this, and locally at least, getting vaccinated, getting boosted is really the only way out. We not only focus on the present, we want to focus on the future as well.
Look, how do so many mutations occur in this one variant? Does it suggest anything about its host, the person that it came from, right? About their immunocompromised status or how long it was with them? Walk us through that.
Yeah, so basically many scientists believe that this particular variant, it has so many mutations, more than 50 overall, 30 in the spike protein, came from one individual who was probably sitting with this virus for many, many weeks and couldn't get rid of it. Because the more you stay in the same body, it's making more and more of itself, the higher the chances of mutation. So it's just picking up mutations as it was trying to reproduce. And that is probably how it escaped. We have other cases in the US with immunocompromised individuals who keep virus in themselves for longer because they can't get rid of it. And that's what leads to a lot of mutations as well. But that's not the whole picture. It's just one of the proposals.
All right, Dr. Peter Chin-Hong, don't go away. We'll continue our conversation with you after taking a short break. In the meantime, if you join us on Facebook Live, we will be answering your questions. And when I say we will be answering your questions, I mean Dr. Chin-Hong will be answering your questions, not me. I will pose them. So Hazel Cross has a question for you, doctor. If a family member is being treated for chemo in California who is across the country, wait a minute, I'm not sure I understand this. If a family member is being treated for CA with chemo who is across the country, would you recommend flying and contact, or is that too risky?
I think if you are boosted, and you're immune, you're not going to be transmitting virus to your friend or family member who is getting chemo and maybe immunocompromised. So I would go and be a good friend or a good family member and help take care of them. I think we're in a good situation right now where we have the technology to at least try to have as maximum immunity as possible on an individual level.
Okay. Let's see, Derek wants to know the Novavax vaccine. Why don't we have it here in the U.S.?
That's a great question. I think that I would love to see Novavax as an option here. It's a very good vaccine. It's a very different type of vaccine. So people who've had reactions to the other two could get benefit from Novavax. It's just a matter of fact that, we're used to, mRNA and J&J.
Any reason to think the number of mutations like we have with Omicron would make the vaccines we have now less effective?
That is the worry, because if you make the spike protein look so different, your antibodies may not recognize it. I also worry of monoclonal antibodies, but I think that even if our antibodies get a hit, our T cells and our inside immunity will be good enough to kill cells if they are infected and prevent us from getting serious disease.
Okay, coming back out in about 20 seconds with a whole slew of questions from our viewers. By the way, Fan Win says, thank you, Dr. Chin-Hong, for your no-nonsense viewpoints. I got that in there. All right, coming out.
4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, we are back with Dr. Peter Chin-Hong talking about Omicron and talking about the fact that the CDC today strengthened its recommendation for boosters in the wake of this variant. What is the new language exactly? My understanding, Dr. Chin-Hong, is that basically everyone 18 and older, if you got your original shots more than 6 months ago, go get that booster. Is that what they're saying?
Yes, don't worry about who's needing the booster more. At this point, with the specter of variants like Omicron, if you're above 18, you got your mRNA shot more than 6 months ago, go get a booster. If you got J&J more than 2 months ago, go get a booster.
All right. Erica has a question for you, though, on Facebook Live. She says, how concerned should we be with this latest mutation for children in the 12 to 17-year-old age group? Will they get boosted soon or be allowed to?
Right now, no plans to get that age group boosted. I think people are still, looking to make, first of all, they would have gotten shots relatively recently. So I think they're going to be protected. And as long as the rest of us get protected, I think they'll be fine. Eventually, I feel like the virus vaccine will settle to a 3-shot deal, just like hepatitis B or HPV, but we're in evolution to that point.
Do you think we're going to need one specific to the Omicron variant? President Biden already said that he is working with the makers of Pfizer and Moderna to talk about, study adapting that. Should it become necessary? He's not saying we need that now. What do you think?
I don't think we'll get to that point, but the technology is there. It'll take 100 days or so. They'll just basically cut and paste the new code into that and put it in the fatty bubble. And the question will be how long it will take to rule it out.
Okay. Holly has a really great question here. If this new variant proves to be mild and more transmissible, would it possibly infect more people like the common cold and create herd immunity?
Possibly. I mean, that is what some pundits think is happening with COVID overall, that it's going to become milder and milder with every successive generation. And that at some point, everybody's going to get it. You're going to have the vaccine, you'll get natural exposure, and that hybrid immunity is really what's going to take us out of this bog or quagmire that we're in right now.
Okay, Dr. Fauci and President Biden today, and actually California state health officials said they were going to double down on getting people vaccinated and boosted. But you have folks that like Yolanda saying, why get a shot when you're going to catch it anyway? What do you say to that as a doctor?
There's so many reasons to get a shot. It's predictable. We don't know if you're unvaccinated, how sick you'll get. There have been so many 30-year-olds who have taken care in the hospital who've been unvaccinated, who are in the ICU, some of whom have died. I really think with this virus, you have to respect it and not play, virus Russian roulette. I would really, really encourage you to get vaccinated, not for just what we know right now, but for future things.
All right. Dr. Chin Hong, as you know, the U.S. has a travel ban now on South Africa and 7 other countries in this Southern Africa region. Many other countries have followed suit as well. Look, there's a lot of talk about whether this is effective, whether this is enough, or does it need to be accompanied by things like PCR testing of every international traveler or, the vaccine mandate or requirement. What do you think?
I think for now, it's an interesting measure. It hasn't worked for when we tried to do it with China, but then we were hampered by lack of diagnostics. It didn't work with Alpha. We probably were a little bit too late for that. And it didn't work for Delta for sure, maybe again, because we were too late. And that's probably why everyone jumped on this Omicron. But again, the cat is already out of the bag. It was probably going on for weeks and weeks. And tons of travel between South Africa and Southern African countries and the rest of the world.
All right. Well, we'll know more, as Dr. Fauci said, in a couple of weeks. But for now, do you think Omicron should affect our Christmas plans, whether it's gathering or travel? What do you think? What's the doctor's prescription here?
I think it shouldn't affect what we're planning to do. We've waited so long for this moment. We've not seen relatives and family and friends for so long. Right now, if you're boosted and you're vaccinated, no worries. If you're unvaccinated, please navigate the world very carefully.
All right, Dr. Chin Hong, always great talking with you. Thanks for all that insight on Omicron. President Biden will be outlining his winter COVID plans on Thursday, so hopefully we'll talk more then. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye-bye. We'll be right back to talk more about the new travel bans and how they'll impact American travelers. We'll be right back. All right, everybody, thanks for your great questions today. You always have good ones, today especially so I do appreciate all of you for submitting them. Let me see if we have some that we can address just between us without Dr. Chin Hong as we wait for our next guest. Tim, you want to know, can you get the booster without having gotten the first 2 shots? So booster is just a name for the 3rd shot, essentially, if you're talking about Pfizer, because it's the same. right? If you go back for a booster, you're getting the same exact dosage and same stuff. If you got Moderna originally, when you go back for your third shot, you're getting half the dosage. So they give you a smaller dose because the first two have proven to be really effective at holding up. And it's also a bigger dose than the Pfizer in terms of the active ingredient. So yeah, just think of booster as the third shot, if you will. A third shot that boosts your immunity back up after the first two, and you're good. And then it does wane a little bit, at 6 months, around there. It's not, one size fits all, but so it's just boosting you back up. But don't think of it as something entirely different in its makeup. It is a smaller dose with Moderna once again, but it's not qualitatively different. All right. Oh, Craig, your question about why I'm not seated next to Reggie in midday. We still have some social distancing things that we do depending on the needs of particular shows. Hopefully we'll get through this winter without a terrible surge like we saw last winter, and hopefully we can come back together shortly. But it's always with safety as primary consideration. All right, coming back out. Welcome back. The U.S. is imposing a new travel ban from South Africa and 7 other countries. Dozens of other countries have done the same amid concerns about the new Omicron variant. So what does this mean for American travelers? And will this impact airfare, for example, as we get closer to Christmas? Joining us now to answer those questions and more is Scott Keyes, founder of Scott's Cheap Flights. Scott, good to see you. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving.
Hey, likewise. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so the U.S. announced a ban on South Africa and 7 other countries in southern Africa. Many European countries have announced the same ban, but I read that Delta and United at least were going to keep flying for now, so it's kind of confusing. So help us understand exactly what this means.
That's right. So those flights are still going to continue for the time being because it's still the case that U.S. citizens and legal permanent residents of the United States are allowed to fly back to the United States if they're in any of those affected Southern African countries. If you're not a U.S. citizen or legal permanent resident, you're not allowed on those flights currently, or if you've been to any of those countries in the past 14 days. But for the time being, the flights are still flying.
Got it. So Americans can come back, but can we start a new trip to those countries?
I guess you'd be able to get on that plane to those countries tomorrow if you'd like to. I would suspect that very few people are going to be making that trip.
Yeah.
But, it's been the case, as it was early in the pandemic when it first began, that U.S. citizens are still by and large allowed to come and go. Again, you're still going to need to take that recent negative test before getting to the U.S., but you're still allowed to return as a U.S. citizen.
I was just going to say, right, for returning U.S. citizens, what is the requirement? Is there a pre-flight test, post-flight test? Is there a vaccine proof? What is there?
Right now, so it varies a little bit depending on your vaccine status. If you have been vaccinated, you still go by the old rules where you have 3 days before your trip to the United States where you have to take a test and then show that to the airline officials. If you have not been vaccinated, that window actually decreases to just 1 day is what you have in order to be able to fly back to the U.S. So this is one way to not only encourage folks to get vaccinated, but to try to make sure that everybody stays as safe as possible and prevents further infection.
All right. A few countries are going even further. I think Israel, not sure about Morocco, possibly Japan. I heard they're just outright banning all foreigners, right? And that's a move we haven't seen since early in the pandemic.
That's right. So these broad travel restrictions are taking place in a handful of countries. You mentioned Israel, Morocco, Japan. Most countries are still in very much a wait and see mode, as the scientists really kind of explore how bad is Omicron, what does this new variant look like, and what impact does it have? And so for the most part, I think if this new variant plays out anything like Delta, I think what we can expect to see is a handful of countries putting these blanket travel bans in place, while most others still continue to welcome vaccinated travelers. That unvaccinated folks may face additional hurdles, delays, or not able to visit certain countries, while vaccinated travelers are still by and large welcome. Perhaps maybe in some countries requiring a recent negative test, but by and large, unless this turns out to be a very, very severe strain, I would expect most countries to continue to welcome vaccinated travelers.
Look, it's only had a name for 4 days, but already, it's had a chilling effect on a lot of things, including the stock market. I wonder if you're already seeing now a dampening of enthusiasm to travel. Have bookings slowed since Omicron came out into our consciousness?
Yeah, it's a little bit early for it to show up in the data. You haven't seen airlines react with any significant schedule changes or anything like that. But I think one data point that you have seen as a direct result of the Omicron variant is in the flight searches done by leisure travelers. You saw over the weekend just a modest dip in the number of domestic flight searches, but you saw a pretty big drop in the number of people searching for international trips. And what I think that tells us is that people are being a little bit more cautious about traveling overseas, again, in that wait and see mode with this new variant, but still comfortable and eager to travel domestically, in large part just because maybe they feel more safe, or because they know if you're traveling domestically, there's not the same risk of having to quarantine for a week or two if you were to happen to get a recent a positive test before your flight back to the United States. You aren't going to face the same hurdles if you're taking a trip to Arizona or Florida or Chicago or anywhere else in the U.S.
Usually the way airlines are concerned that they won't get the bookings or the customers or passengers is when they start lowering prices. Not seeing that just yet, right? Is that what you're saying?
Not specifically because of the Omicron variant. Look, this is all happening in the backdrop of the holiday weekend with, Cyber Monday, Black Friday. You see some advertised sales, but I think that's absolutely right. This will be a tell for if you see a big drop in the number of bookings, and if airlines really start to feel like they need to pull out all the stops to get new bookings. The upshot is I think you're going to see significant fare reductions in sales as a result to try to entice people back into airplanes and back on those trips.
Vivian posted an interesting comment on Facebook Live. She said our son will be doing his study abroad in Finland starting in January. He's vaxxed and boosted, but we did get traveler's insurance just in case. Fingers crossed. Is traveler's insurance a good idea right now? And does it cover things related to COVID?
It can be. Look, some traveler insurance covers it, some doesn't. You definitely want to read the fine print always with travel insurance, but especially with something like coronavirus, because certain policies might cover you in case you get sick or otherwise aren't able to take that trip. But remembering that for most travel insurance, it is not carte blanche to be able to just decide, oh, it doesn't seem like a good idea to travel, and so I'm going to try to get a refund. For that, you had to book a much more expensive cancel for any reason travel insurance, which even then only usually reimburses you about 75% of your trip cost. So making sure you read the fine print on the insurance. The other thing to be aware of is that basically all major airlines, setting aside the budget airlines, but the major ones, American, United, Delta, et cetera, are all giving automatic free flexibility so that when you book a new flight on those airlines, you can change your travel dates later on and without having to pay the normal $200, $300, $400 penalty that you had to pre-pandemic. This doesn't apply generally to basic economy tickets, but generally speaking, you have that flexibility in a way you didn't before, so you can make your travel plans in pencil rather than in pen.
Yeah, that's good that they're still doing that. I know it started during the pandemic and they kept it up. So look, where was the airline and travel industry before Omicron, made headlines starting last week? I mean, had it bounced back? Was it, pretty close to, because I know Thanksgiving travel volume was pretty close to pre-pandemic.
Yeah, things have been rebounding pretty quickly for the travel industry and the airline industry. Just yesterday, we saw the highest number of travelers, almost 2.5 million since the pandemic began. And last week, we actually saw, for the first time since the pandemic began, we saw airplanes more full than they had been in the same week in 2019. And so I think that's indicative of people really, excited to be able to travel again, being able to get those booster shots and feel more comfortable getting out and doing so. But that's all, data from pre-Omicron. We'll see how this starts to show up in the data later this week and next week. And again, what the scientists conclude about how bad this variant actually ends up being.
All right, Scott Keyes from Scott's Cheap Flights. Don't go away. We'll take a short break on the air, but we invite you to join our conversation on Facebook Live right now. So, Scott, I want to get to, if you don't mind, if you have a couple more minutes, we're off air, but
Sure.
we're still on Facebook live streaming the end of the show. And Ava has a question for you. Basically, in 2022, next year, she plans to travel to Dallas and New York. So her question is, do we need to wear masks in those states and take a COVID test in California? It's already in effect. What do you know about that?
Generally speaking, no. There's no airline where you have to have shown a recent negative test in order to get on the plane when you're traveling domestically. The one exception is if you're flying to Hawaii in some cases. But if you're flying to Texas, you're flying to New York, you don't need a recent negative test or even to show proof of vaccination for the flights. There are some places in New York in order to get into restaurants or shows or other places where you'll need to show proof of vaccination or perhaps a recent negative test. I think it's much less the case in throughout Texas.
Yeah, so that is a good point, right? To check with that particular states. I don't know if it's checking with their public health department or whatever, but before you go, so you're not surprised when you get there. Which leads me to Europe, because I know there are a lot of countries, or at least several, that are instituting lockdowns. At the same time, you're seeing, pretty reasonable airfares to Europe. So I know a lot of Americans are considering it. What do they need to know if they're considering an upcoming trip to Europe?
Yeah, again, remembering that flexibility that you have so that if, let's say you book a flight for spring of 2022, obviously none of us have a crystal ball where we can say what the COVID situation is going to look like 6 months from now. But we know that we have flexibility to change our plans if it doesn't seem like a good time to go. So remembering that you're not locked in, your flight plans are not quite as immutable as they had been pre-pandemic. And then just keeping an eye on the situation, remembering that the COVID situation that exists today is not the same one that's going to exist 6 months from now, for better or for worse. Hopefully for better. Hopefully, again, the vaccines continue to do their work, but it's flexible.
Scott, always enjoy talking with you. You got so much great information. Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us on this interactive show, Getting Answers. We'll be here every weekday at 3 o'clock for you on air and on live stream, answering your questions. Today, we address questions regarding the Omicron variant and also the latest travel bans. World News Tonight is coming up next, and I'll be back here at 4 o'clock for the news. Bye-bye.